In the snow-covered wilderness of Montana, where jagged peaks pierce the sky and silence reigns, a hidden secret lies buried beneath the surface. Ironclad Station, a facility disguised as a relic of Cold War research, holds the key to humanity's future. Aegis, a revolutionary energy project capable of reshaping the world. But in the wrong hands, it could bring devastation on a scale unimaginable. Victor Kane, a battle-scarred leader haunted by his past, never expected to return to a life of conflict. For years, he sought refuge in the mountains, far from the battles that defined him. Yet when a ruthless shadow network of corporations, mercenaries, and cartels converge on Ironclad, drawn by whispers of the project's potential, Victor finds himself at the center of a fight he cannot ignore. Joined by a team of misfits, each with a past as complicated as his own, Victor is thrust into a battle not just to protect Aegis, but to ensure it isn't weaponized for greed and power. What begins as a covert operation to defend a classified facility quickly spirals into something far greater, a war of ideologies, of redemption, and of trust. As the enemy's tactics grow more cunning and their forces more relentless, Victor and his team must confront not only external threats but their own demons. Betrayals emerge, alliances are tested, and the line between friend and foe blurs. But when the ultimate battle for Aegis unfolds, it isn't brute force that will decide the outcome. It's the strength of the community they've built, the secrets they've buried, and the unshakable resolve of those who refuse to surrender. What lengths will they go to in order to protect what matters most? And how far will their enemies go to claim it for themselves? The fight for Ironclad Station begins now. The Arctic stretched endlessly in every direction, an unbroken expanse of snow and ice shimmering beneath the pale winter sun. The wind howled outside the Ironclad research station, battering its steel walls and filling the air with a low, haunting moan. To most, this place was a frozen wasteland, a desolate, inhospitable corner of the earth. But to the team stationed here, it was home. Inside, the hum of machines and soft murmurs of voices echoed through the research station's narrow halls. Dr. Elizabeth Carter, the team's head geologist, studied a set of seismic readings on her tablet. Her sharp green eyes narrowed behind her glasses as she tapped the screen, double-checking her data. Another anomaly, she muttered to herself. That's the third one this month. Behind her, Marcus Dean leaned against the wall, sipping a mug of hot coffee. Marcus was tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair streaked with gray. His quiet demeanor and steady hands marked him as the team's most reliable systems engineer, though his past, rumored to involve the Russian military, remained a mystery to everyone but him. "You think it's another tectonic shift?" Marcus asked, his Russian accent faint but noticeable. Elizabeth shook her head. "No, this is different. The readings are irregular. It's almost like something beneath the ice is moving, but it's not geological." Before Marcus could respond, the intercom crackled to life. "Dr. Carter, Marcus, report to the main control room," said the voice of Commander Victor Hayes. "We've got something you'll want to see." Victor Hayes was a man who commanded respect. Even at 55, his presence filled the room. His piercing blue eyes and calm authority hinted at a life spent in the military, though he rarely spoke of his past. Officially, he was hired as the station's director to oversee operations and maintain security in the remote Arctic wilderness. Unofficially, he carried secrets that weighed heavily on his shoulders. Elizabeth and Marcus exchanged a glance before making their way to the control room. The station's central hub was a compact, high-tech space filled with monitors displaying weather patterns, seismic data, and satellite feeds. Tyler Grayson, the youngest member of the team, was already there, staring intently at a monitor. "Commander," Elizabeth greeted as she entered. "What's going on?" Victor gestured to a screen displaying a radar feed. "We picked up this signal about an hour ago. At first, I thought it was a malfunction, but it's consistent. Something's moving out there." Elizabeth squinted at the screen. A faint blip pulsed steadily against the backdrop of the icy expanse. It was far too slow for an aircraft and too deliberate for drifting ice. "It's not wildlife," Tyler said, his tone nervous. "It's moving against the wind." "What's our distance?" Marcus asked, leaning over to examine the controls. 20 miles, roughly, Victor replied. But it's not the signal itself that concerns me. It's the frequency. Marcus frowned. Encrypted military? Victor nodded. Something's out there, and it's not friendly. Elizabeth folded her arms, her brow furrowed. So what do we do? We're isolated up here. No one's coming to help in this storm. Victor straightened, his voice steady. We monitor. No one leaves the station, and we don't engage unless absolutely necessary. Just as he finished speaking, the intercom buzzed again. This time, it was the station's communication system. A low, distorted voice crackled through the speakers. Ironclad station, do you read? Over. The team froze. For months, they'd been alone in the Arctic, cut off from the rest of the world except for scheduled supply drops. This was unexpected. Victor reached for the microphone, his hands steady. This is Ironclad Station. Identify yourself. Over. There was a long pause, followed by static. Then the voice returned, clearer this time. This is Arctic Air Transport. Supply plane incoming. ETA 30 minutes. Over. Tyler frowned. That's strange. We weren't scheduled for a drop today. Victor's jaw tightened. Marcus, check the logs. Elizabeth, pull up the flight schedules. I want to know if this is legitimate. The team worked quickly, scanning through data and cross-referencing records. Within minutes, Marcus looked up, his expression grim. No supply drops are logged for this month. Whoever that is, they're not on the manifest. Victor's eyes narrowed. Then we assume hostile intent. Everyone, gear up. Marcus, secure the station's entrances. Tyler, activate the perimeter cameras. Elizabeth, with me? The team scattered, the air in the station thick with tension. Victor led Elizabeth to a secure room at the back of the station. He unlocked a metal door, revealing a hidden arsenal of weapons and survival gear. Elizabeth's eyes widened. I thought this was a research station. It is, Victor said, his tone grim. But it's also a contingency outpost for classified operations. There are things here the world isn't supposed to know about. That includes what's beneath this station. Elizabeth glanced at the floor, suddenly aware of the weight of the secrets buried under their feet. Aegis, she whispered. Victor gave her a sharp look. How do you know about that? Elizabeth hesitated. I read the blueprints when I was hired. I wasn't supposed to, but... Victor sighed. Let's hope we don't have to use it. Outside, the Arctic storm intensified. Snow whipped across the landscape, reducing visibility to nearly zero. The faint hum of an aircraft engine grew louder, cutting through the howling wind. Victor and Marcus stood by the main entrance, weapons in hand. Tyler monitored the cameras from the control room, his fingers trembling as he reported updates. Planes coming in low, he said. Looks like a cargo craft. No markings. Victor's eyes hardened. That's no supply plane. The aircraft landed roughly, its engines roaring before cutting off. The bay doors opened, and 6 figures stepped out, their faces obscured by heavy winter gear. Victor tightened his grip on his rifle. Stay sharp. They're not here for a friendly visit. The intruders approached the station, their movements calculated and deliberate. One of them raised a hand, signaling to the others. Commander, Marcus whispered. They're armed. Victor nodded. We don't engage unless they force it. Let's see what they want. The lead figure stepped forward, raising a hand in greeting. We're here on behalf of Arctic Air Transport, he called out. Routine delivery. Victor didn't lower his weapon. You're not on the manifest. State your business, or turn back. The figure hesitated, then removed his hood, revealing a scarred face and cold eyes. I think you know why we're here, he said, his voice carrying over the wind. Let's not make this difficult. Victor's heart sank. The storm wasn't the only thing descending on the station tonight. The 6 intruders stood in a tight formation outside the station, their weapons visible now beneath their heavy winter gear. Snow swirled around them, the Arctic storm creating a surreal backdrop for the confrontation. Inside the ironclad research station, Victor Hayes stared at their leader through the reinforced glass of the entrance. What's the plan? Marcus whispered, standing beside Victor with his rifle ready. His voice was calm, but his sharp eyes tracked the intruder's every move. Victor kept his voice low. They're not here to talk. We hold position and make them show their hand first. In the control room, Tyler watched the monitors nervously. The storm had blanketed most of the external cameras, leaving only blurred outlines of the figures outside. "I don't like this, Commander," he said into the radio. "They're waiting for something." "They're testing us," Victor replied. "Let's not fail." The lead figure outside raised his hands, feigning a show of peace. His voice carried through the storm, calm but calculated. "We're here to make a simple deal. Open your doors, let us inside, and nobody gets hurt." Victor activated the intercom, his tone cold. "You're not on our manifest, and this is private property. Turn back, or we'll call for military intervention." The leader chuckled darkly. "Military intervention? Out here? We both know how long that would take, Commander Hayes." Victor stiffened. The man knew his name. He quickly scanned the intruders again. Their movements, their stances. They weren't random thugs. These were trained professionals. "How does he know you?" Marcus asked. Victor's jaw tightened. "That's what I'd like to find out." In the distance, the storm howled louder, and a strange crackling noise echoed through the station. Tyler checked his equipment and frowned. "Commander, the comms are being jammed. Someone's interfering with our frequencies." Marcus cursed under his breath. "They're cutting off our lifeline." Victor nodded. "They want to isolate us." "Tyler, switch to our secure channel and start monitoring any signals coming from their location." "Marcus, lock down every entrance. No one gets in unless I say so." As Marcus moved to secure the station, Victor's mind raced. The intruders' confidence wasn't random. They knew exactly where they were and what they wanted. In the main lab, Elizabeth Carter worked quickly, trying to decipher the encrypted signal they'd intercepted earlier. She barely noticed when Helen Krauss, the team's hydrologist, entered the room, her footsteps unusually quiet. "Elizabeth," Helen said, her voice low, "I need to talk to you." Elizabeth glanced up briefly, her focus still on the monitor. "Can it wait? We've got a situation." "No," Helen interrupted. "It can't." The urgency in Helen's voice made Elizabeth pause. She turned to face her colleague and immediately noticed the pale, almost panicked look on her face. "What's wrong?" Elizabeth asked. Helen hesitated, her hands trembling slightly. "They're not here by accident," she whispered. They knew where to find us." Elizabeth frowned. "What are you saying?" Helen swallowed hard, her voice breaking. "I didn't have a choice. They've been blackmailing me for months. My family. They threatened to kill my family if I didn't cooperate." Elizabeth's eyes widened. "You're working with them?" "I didn't want to," Helen said quickly, tears forming in her eyes. "I thought it was just information. They told me it was harmless, just geological data. But then they started asking about Aegis." Elizabeth felt a chill run down her spine. "You told them about the facility?" "I didn't know what it was," Helen said, her voice cracking. "I didn't know what I was giving them until it was too late." Before Elizabeth could respond, the intercom crackled again. Victor's voice came through, sharp and commanding. "Elizabeth, report to the control room. Now." Helen grabbed Elizabeth's arm. "Please, you have to believe me. I want to fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." Elizabeth stared at her colleague, torn between anger and sympathy. "We'll deal with this later," she said finally. "Right now, we have bigger problems." Back in the control room, the tension was palpable. Victor stood at the monitors, watching as the intruders outside began to spread out, positioning themselves strategically around the station. "They're moving into flanking positions," Marcus reported, his tone grim. "They're preparing for an assault." Elizabeth entered the room, her face pale but composed. "Commander, we need to talk." Victor glanced at her, but didn't have time to respond before Tyler interrupted. "They're doing something to the generators. Look at this." On the monitor, one of the intruders crouched near the station's external power grid. Sparks flew as he worked quickly, bypassing the station's electrical systems. "They're trying to disable the station," Marcus said. Victor's eyes narrowed. "Not disable, redirect. They're going after the entrance to the underground facility." Elizabeth felt her stomach drop. "They know about Aegis." Victor turned to her sharply. "How?" Elizabeth hesitated, glancing at Helen, who had quietly slipped into the room behind her. "She can explain," Elizabeth said, her voice tight. All eyes turned to Helen. Her face was pale, and her hands were clasped tightly in front of her. "It's true," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I gave them information, but I didn't know what they were planning. I swear, I didn't know." Marcus took a step toward her, his expression dark. "You sold us out? Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Enough," Victor said, his voice cutting through the tension. "Right now, we need to focus on stopping them. Helen, if you want to fix this, you're going to help us. Understand?" Helen nodded quickly. "Anything. Just tell me what to do." Victor turned back to the monitors. The intruders were making progress, and time was running out. "We don't have much time. Marcus, get to the generators and secure them. Elizabeth, stay here and monitor their movements. Helen, you're coming with me." Helen looked surprised. "Where are we going?" "To level the playing field," Victor said, his eyes cold. As the storm raged outside, Victor led Helen to the secure room at the back of the station. He opened the hidden arsenal again, this time pulling out a sleek, high-tech communication jammer. "What's that?" Helen asked, her voice shaking. "Insurance," Victor said. "If they want to fight, we'll give them one, but on our terms." He handed her a small device. "This will disrupt their comms for a short time. Plant it near their leader when the time comes. Can you do that?" Helen nodded nervously. "Yes." "Good," Victor said, "because this isn't just about us anymore. If they get their hands on Aegis, they could destabilize the entire region." Helen's eyes widened. "You're saying Aegis can detect and track submarines across the globe," Victor said. "If they get access to it, they could turn it into a weapon. That's why we have to stop them." The weight of Victor's words hung heavy in the air as the storm continued to howl. Outside, the intruders prepared for their next move, unaware that the team inside was ready to fight back. The Arctic wind shrieked as if nature itself were trying to warn of the violence about to unfold. Victor Hayes stood at the station's northern access point, his rifle slung across his chest and his eyes fixed on the shifting shadows of the intruders moving through the storm. They were getting closer. "Marcus, report," Victor said into his comm. Static crackled, followed by Marcus's calm voice. "Generators are secure for now, but they've tampered with the secondary grid. They're trying to force a power failure to access the lower levels." Victor gritted his teeth. Aegis. It always came back to that. Whatever promises had been made to protect the station's secrets, they were now unraveling under the pressure of armed professionals with nothing to lose. "Hold position," Victor ordered. "Elizabeth, what's the situation on the eastern side?" Elizabeth's voice came through, tense but steady. "The intruders are splitting up. 2 are moving toward the east entrance, and the others are hanging back. I think they're setting up a fallback position." Victor's gut churned. These weren't ordinary mercenaries. They were trained, methodical, and working to corner his team. "Understood. Keep tracking them. I'll intercept the eastern group." "Be careful," Elizabeth replied. Inside the station's control room, Tyler adjusted the cameras with shaking hands. The storm was making visibility almost impossible, but every so often, a shadow or glint of movement appeared on the monitors. "They're coordinated," Tyler muttered to himself, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Too coordinated." Helen Krauss stood nearby, her face pale as she watched the screens. She clutched the small jamming device Victor had given her, as though it might protect her from the chaos she had helped bring. "Tyler," she said quietly, "how much time do you think we have?" He didn't look at her, his focus on the cameras. "Not long. Maybe 10 minutes before they breach the outer doors. Victor's buying us time, but we need a plan for what happens after." Helen swallowed hard. "If they get inside, is there another layer of security for Aegis?" Tyler finally glanced at her, his expression grim. "There is, but it's not what you think. Aegis isn't locked away in some vault. The entire station is wired to protect it. But if they compromise the systems, they'll own everything," Helen finished, dread creeping into her voice. Victor moved silently through the howling storm, his boots crunching on the frozen ground. The eastern entrance loomed ahead, a small structure buried beneath layers of snow and ice. He could see 2 figures moving toward it, their silhouettes barely visible through the white haze. Marcus's voice crackled in his ear. "Commander, you've got about 30 seconds before they reach the door. If they get inside, it'll take them less than 5 minutes to disable the locks." Victor crouched behind a snowbank, raising his rifle. His breath fogged in the freezing air as he lined up his shot. He couldn't afford to miss. "Marcus, stand by to trigger perimeter defenses if I don't stop them." "Copy that." Victor steadied his aim, exhaling slowly. The lead intruder was carrying a small device, likely an override tool for the station's locks. If they gained access to the eastern entrance, it would give them a direct path to Aegis. Victor fired. The crack of his rifle was almost lost in the storm, but the result was immediate. The lead intruder dropped, his override tool clattering to the ground. The second man spun around, raising his weapon, but Victor was faster. A second shot rang out, and the threat was neutralized. "Eastern team neutralized," Victor reported into his comm. Elizabeth's voice came through. "Good work, but we've got a new problem. The remaining intruders are converging on the main entrance. They're using the storm as cover." Victor cursed under his breath. "I'm on my way." In the control room, Tyler's hands moved faster as new alerts popped up on his screen. "They're going for the main entrance. 5 of them. This is it." Helen stared at the monitors, fear gripping her. "What do we do?" Tyler hesitated, then activated the station's loudspeakers. "Attention, all personnel. Prepare for breach. All non-essential staff, retreat to the lower levels immediately." Helen looked at him in alarm. "Are you sending them to Aegis?" "No," Tyler said firmly. "We're sending them to safety. Aegis is secured, but the rest of us aren't bulletproof." As the loudspeakers blared the warning, the station's lights flickered. The intruders had managed to disrupt part of the electrical grid, plunging sections of the station into darkness. "They're coming," Tyler whispered. Victor arrived at the main entrance just as the lights dimmed. Marcus was already there, his rifle trained on the reinforced doors. "They've rigged something to the door," Marcus said, gesturing to a blinking device attached to the locking mechanism. "Looks like a breaching charge." Victor's eyes narrowed. "We can't let them get through. Are the internal defenses still active?" "For now," Marcus replied. "But if they blow that door, the shockwave could disable the sensors." Victor nodded. "Then we don't let them blow the door." He switched his radio to a secure frequency. "Elizabeth, we need that jamming device active now." "I'm on it," Elizabeth replied from her position in the control room. Seconds later, the station's perimeter sensors activated, emitting a high-frequency pulse that disrupted the intruder's equipment. Through the storm, Victor saw the figures outside falter, their coordination briefly disrupted. "That's our window," Victor said. "Marcus, cover me." He moved quickly, staying low as he approached the door. The blinking breaching charge was still active, its timer ticking down. Victor reached into his kit and pulled out a small EMP device. "Come on," he muttered under his breath as he worked to disable the charge. Behind him, Marcus fired into the storm, keeping the intruders pinned down. The crack of his rifle echoed through the wind, buying Victor precious seconds. Finally, Victor triggered the EMP. The breaching charge fizzled and went dark. "Charge disabled," he said, retreating to cover. Marcus grinned. "Nice work, Commander." Their relief was short-lived. One of the intruders fired a grenade, and the explosion sent a wave of shrapnel ripping through the air. Victor and Marcus dove for cover as the blast shook the station. "Status." Victor barked into his radio. Elizabeth's voice came through, shaky but clear. "They've breached part of the outer wall. We're losing integrity near the northwest sector." Victor's mind raced. They were running out of time, and the intruders were getting closer to Aegis. In the control room, Tyler worked frantically to reroute power and seal off compromised areas. Helen stood beside him, clutching the jammer. "They're going to find it, aren't they?" she asked. "Not if we stop them first," Tyler said. The station shook again as another explosion echoed through the halls. This was no longer a skirmish, it was war. Victor's voice came through the intercom, calm but firm. "Everyone, fall back to the central chamber. We hold them here, no matter what." The explosions rattled the ironclad research station, sending flakes of frost cascading from the ceilings. The once quiet outpost was now a battleground, its walls reverberating with the clash of professional intruders and the determined defenders within. Victor Hayes sprinted through the dimly lit corridors toward the central chamber. His rifle was slung across his chest, and his mind raced as he calculated their next steps. The intruders were relentless, and the breach in the northwest sector had exposed a critical vulnerability. "Marcus, report." Victor barked into his comms. "I'm holding them at the breach," Marcus replied, his voice tense but controlled. "But they've got advanced gear, night vision, thermal imaging. It's not amateurs out here." Victor clenched his jaw. He had already known that. These attackers were too organized, too deliberate. This wasn't just a raid. It was a surgical operation with one clear objective: Aegis. In the control room, Tyler's hands flew across the keyboard as he rerouted power to stabilize the station's systems. "I've sealed off 3 more corridors," he said over the comms. "That should slow them down." Helen stood beside him, her knuckles white as she gripped the jamming device Victor had entrusted to her. The gravity of the situation was crushing. Every noise, every flicker of light, made her flinch. "Where do you need me?" she asked, her voice shaky but determined. Tyler glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "You want to make this right? Head to sublevel 2. There's an auxiliary control panel there. If they get past US, that's where you'll need to deploy the jammer." Helen nodded, swallowing her fear. She grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the stairs. At the breach site, Marcus crouched behind a stack of reinforced crates, his rifle trained on the opening. Snow blew in through the hole in the wall, carried by the Arctic storm outside. Through his scope, Marcus watched as the intruders moved with military precision. One carried a shield, advancing slowly while the others provided cover fire. "They're coming in hot, Commander," Marcus reported. "I count 5, no, 6. One's hanging back. Looks like the leader." Victor's voice crackled in his ear. "Hold them as long as you can. Don't let them push further into the station." Marcus smirked. "Wouldn't dream of it." The first intruder rounded the corner, shield raised. Marcus fired, the impact ricocheting off the metal barrier. A second shot struck the intruder's leg, and the man went down with a grunt. "Not so tough now," Marcus muttered. The remaining intruders pressed forward, using their fallen comrade as cover. Marcus tossed a smoke grenade, the gray cloud billowing out to obscure their vision. "Tyler," Marcus called into his comm, "how about some help down here?" "I'm working on it," Tyler replied. "Stand by." A moment later, the station's sprinkler system activated, drenching the intruders in freezing water. The combination of smoke and water caused chaos, and Marcus used the distraction to take out 2 more attackers. "Nice timing," Marcus said. "Don't thank me yet," Tyler replied. "They're adapting faster than I thought." Meanwhile, Victor reached the central chamber, where Elizabeth was waiting with a tablet in hand. She had been monitoring the intruders' movements and directing the team from the station's heart. "They're cutting through the northwest," Elizabeth said, pointing to the map. "If Marcus can't hold them, they'll have a straight shot to Aegis." Victor nodded grimly. "And we can't let that happen." "How's the evacuation of the non-essential personnel?" "Everyone's secured in the lower levels," Elizabeth replied. "But if they get to the mainframe—" "They won't," Victor interrupted. His voice was firm, but Elizabeth could see the tension in his eyes. She hesitated before speaking again. "Victor, if it comes down to it, can we destroy Aegis?" Victor stared at her, the weight of her question sinking in. Aegis was more than just technology. It was a game-changer in global security, a tool that could either protect or devastate depending on whose hands it fell into. "If we have no other choice," he said finally, "then yes." On sublevel 2, Helen moved cautiously through the dimly lit hallway. The flickering emergency lights cast eerie shadows on the walls, and the distant sounds of gunfire made her heart race. She reached the auxiliary control panel and set the jammer on the floor beside her. Her hands trembled as she connected the device to the panel, following Victor's instructions. As she worked, a noise behind her made her freeze. She turned slowly, her flashlight illuminating the face of one of the intruders. He was younger than she expected, with sharp features and cold eyes. His weapon was raised, but he hadn't fired yet. "Don't move," he ordered. Helen's mind raced. She had no weapon, no training, Nothing but the jammer and her instincts. "I'm just a scientist," she said quickly. "I don't want any trouble." The intruder stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he took in the device on the floor. "What's that?" "It's just a diagnostic tool," Helen lied, trying to sound calm. The man didn't look convinced. He raised his weapon higher, but before he could act, a shadow moved behind him. Elizabeth appeared silently, a metal wrench in her hand. She struck the intruder hard, and he crumpled to the floor. Helen stared at Elizabeth in shock. How did you?" "No time," Elizabeth said, pulling Helen to her feet. "Did you finish setting up the jammer?" "Almost," Helen said, her hands shaking as she returned to the panel. Elizabeth crouched beside her, keeping her wrench ready. "Hurry. They won't stay distracted forever." At the breach, Marcus was running low on ammunition. The smoke had cleared, and the remaining intruders were closing in. "I could really use some backup, Commander," Marcus said into his comm. "Hang tight," Victor replied. "I'm en route." Marcus fired his last round, taking down one more attacker before retreating behind the crates. He drew his sidearm, ready for a last stand, when a deafening blast rocked the station. Victor appeared through the smoke, his rifle blazing. He took out the last of the attackers with precision, then pulled Marcus to his feet. "Nice of you to join the party," Marcus said, grinning despite the tension. "Couldn't let you have all the fun," Victor replied. In the control room, Tyler's voice came through the speakers. "Commander, the jammer's online. Their comms are down." "Good," Victor said. "Elizabeth, what's their status?" Elizabeth's voice was steady. "They're regrouping near the main corridor. They've lost their tactical edge, but they're not retreating." Victor nodded. "Then we finish this. Marcus, you're with me. Elizabeth, stay with Helen and keep the jammer running. Tyler, monitor for any surprises." The team moved into position, preparing for the final confrontation. The intruders were weakened, but they weren't beaten yet. As Victor led the charge, his determination was unwavering. Aegis was more than a project. It was a symbol of everything they had worked to protect, and he wasn't about to let it fall into the wrong hands. The chill of the Arctic winds seeped through the cracks of Ironclad Station as Victor and Marcus pressed forward into the main corridor, their boots crunching over the remnants of shattered equipment. The metallic tang of smoke filled the air, blending with the faint hum of the station's failing systems. Somewhere ahead, the remaining intruders regrouped, recalibrating their assault strategy. "Tyler," Victor said into his comm, his voice low but commanding, "how are their movements looking?" Tyler's response came after a brief pause, his voice tinged with urgency. "They're consolidating in the northern access hallway. Looks like they're switching to breach tactics, probably explosives. They're cutting through anything we throw at them, Commander." Victor exchanged a glance with Marcus, who was still catching his breath after their close call at the breach. "How many?" "For confirmed, possibly 5, Tyler answered. "But here's the kicker. The one hanging back? He's issuing commands. This guy's not just a contractor. He's running the whole operation." Victor's jaw tightened. "Good. We'll take him out and break their chain of command." Meanwhile, in the auxiliary control room on sublevel 2, Helen and Elizabeth monitored the jammer's systems. Helen's fingers danced over the control panel, making adjustments to counteract the intruders' relentless attempts to bypass the interference. The device pulsed steadily, its lights casting an eerie glow on the walls. "They're trying to restore their comms," Helen muttered, her voice trembling. Whoever designed their gear knew what they were doing. Elizabeth paced behind her, the wrench still in her hand. "Just keep them jammed. Victor and Marcus will handle the rest." Helen glanced over her shoulder, her eyes wide with worry. "You say that like it's a guarantee. These people, they don't get Aegis," Elizabeth interrupted, her tone steel. "Not while we're still standing." The floor beneath them trembled as another explosion echoed through the station. Elizabeth steadied herself, gripping a nearby console, while Helen froze in panic. "Stay focused," Elizabeth said firmly. "We're almost through this." At the northern access hallway, the intruders had set up a defensive perimeter, their rifles trained on every possible approach. Their leader, a man with sharp features and cold eyes, knelt over a set of schematics spread across the floor. Status on the breach charges, he asked, his voice calm but authoritative. 2 minutes, one of his men replied. The leader's lips curled into a faint smirk. They're good, but we're better. Once we're inside the central core, we'll lock this place down. Another explosion in the distance caused the walls to shudder. The leader glanced up, his expression tightening. Double time it. They're buying time, and I don't like it. Victor and Marcus approached the northern hallway with caution, using the shadows to mask their movements. The faint glow of the intruder's breach charges illuminated the walls, casting flickering shadows that betrayed their positions. Marcus, Victor whispered, nodding toward a stack of crates. Marcus moved silently, taking cover behind the crates and positioning himself for a clear line of sight. He raised his rifle, his finger hovering over the trigger. Victor activated his comms. Elizabeth, can you isolate the power in this sector? Kill the lights for 30 seconds. Elizabeth's voice came through. It'll disrupt our defenses, but I can manage it. Stand by. The lights flickered once, then plunged the hallway into darkness. Now, Victor ordered. Marcus fired the first shot, the muzzle flash briefly illuminating the corridor. The bullet struck one of the intruders in the shoulder, sending him sprawling. Chaos erupted as the remaining intruders opened fire, their shots sparking off the walls in the pitch-black hallway. Victor moved swiftly, his rifle trained on the leader. He fired twice, forcing the man to duck behind cover. They're pinned, Marcus said, reloading. Keep the pressure on, Victor replied, advancing carefully. In the auxiliary control room, Helen noticed a sudden spike in system activity. Something's wrong, she said, her voice rising in alarm. They're not just trying to restore comms, they're rerouting power to the mainframe. Elizabeth's head snapped toward her. What does that mean? It means they've got someone working from the inside, Helen replied, her hands flying over the keyboard. Someone who knows exactly how this station operates. Elizabeth's face darkened. They've compromised us. We need to warn Victor, Helen said, reaching for her comm. Before she could speak, the lights in the room dimmed, and the door slammed shut. A mechanical hiss followed as the locks engaged. Elizabeth raised her wrench, her eyes scanning the room. We're not alone. Back in the hallway, Victor noticed a shift in the intruders' behavior. Their fire became less concentrated, and 2 of them began retreating toward the central chamber. They're stalling us, Marcus said, frustration creeping into his voice. Victor's eyes narrowed. They're splitting up. Tyler, do you see this? Tyler's voice came through, laced with panic. Yeah, I see it. They're moving toward the mainframe. And Commander, Helen and Elizabeth are locked in the auxiliary room. Victor's stomach dropped. What? I've tried overriding the locks, but something's blocking me, Tyler explained. Damn it, Victor growled. Marcus, keep them pinned. I'm heading to the auxiliary room. In the sealed control room, Helen worked frantically to disable the locks. Her hands trembled as she typed, her focus broken by every creak and groan of the station's aging walls. They're going to get in, she whispered. Elizabeth stood by the door, her grip on the wrench tightening. Not without a fight. The faint sound of footsteps echoed outside the room. Helen froze, her eyes darting to Elizabeth. They're here, Elizabeth said quietly. Suddenly, the door rattled as someone tried to force it open. Helen's heart pounded in her chest. She glanced at Elizabeth, who raised her wrench, ready to strike. The door burst open, and a figure stepped inside. Helen screamed. But Elizabeth moved first, swinging the wrench with all her strength. The intruder deflected the blow and shoved Elizabeth aside. Helen scrambled backward, her eyes wide with terror. The intruder advanced, his weapon raised. But before he could act, Victor appeared in the doorway, his rifle aimed squarely at the man's back. Drop it, Victor commanded. The intruder hesitated, then slowly lowered his weapon. Good choice, Victor said. He motioned to Elizabeth. Get Helen out of here. Now. As the station's defenses continued to crumble, Victor knew they were running out of time. The intruder's leader was still out there, and Aegis was within their reach. Victor raised his comm. Tyler, we need to lock down the mainframe. Do whatever it takes. I'm on it, Tyler replied. Victor turned to Helen and Elizabeth, his expression grim. This isn't over. Stay sharp. They're not done yet. The ironclad station's alarms blared relentlessly, their shrill cries cutting through the suffocating tension. Victor's face was a mask of focus as he led Elizabeth and Helen away from the auxiliary control room. The lights flickered ominously, casting long shadows that danced across the metallic walls. Every step was a calculated risk. "Tyler," Victor called into his comm, his voice sharp. "Status on the mainframe lockdown?" "I've activated every safeguard we've got," Tyler replied. "But they've already breached several layers of the system. They're using insider knowledge. Someone's feeding them our protocols." Victor stopped dead in his tracks, his expression darkening. "What are you saying?" Tyler hesitated, then sighed. "There's a mole. Someone inside Ironclad Station is working with them." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to detonate. Helen gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Elizabeth tightened her grip on the wrench, her jaw clenching in frustration. "That explains why they're always one step ahead," Victor muttered. "We've been playing right into their hands." In the mainframe corridor, Marcus was locked in a tense firefight with the remaining intruders. Bullets ricocheted off the walls as he ducked behind a console, his rifle barking in response. "They're pushing hard, Commander," Marcus shouted into his comm. "I can't hold them much longer." Victor's voice came through, calm but commanding. "Fall back if you have to, Marcus. We can't afford to lose anyone." Marcus gritted his teeth, firing another burst. "Understood. But you'd better have a plan, boss." The trio reached the central control room, where Tyler was furiously working at the console. His fingers moved like lightning, but his expression betrayed his growing anxiety. "They're rerouting power to bypass the lockdown," Tyler explained. "If they gain control of the mainframe, they'll have full access to Aegis." Victor paced, his mind racing. He turned to Helen. "Can the jammer you set up block their access?" Helen nodded hesitantly. "It can disrupt their signal, but only temporarily. They'll adapt." "That's all I need," Victor said. "Set it up to cover the mainframe." Helen nodded, her hands trembling as she began inputting commands. As Helen worked, Tyler's terminal flashed red. "Hold on," he said, leaning closer. "There's a new signal in the system, encrypted, but it's local." Victor frowned. "That's the mole." Tyler began decoding the signal, his jaw tightening as he unraveled the transmission. "It's coming from the medical bay." Victor's heart sank. He knew the implications. There was only one person in the medical bay. "Nash," Victor said grimly. Elizabeth's eyes widened. "Nash? That's impossible. He's one of us." Victor's expression hardened. "No one's above suspicion right now. Stay here. I'll handle this." Victor moved swiftly through the station, his footsteps echoing in the eerily silent corridors. His rifle was raised, every corner a potential ambush. The medical bay door was slightly ajar, its faint light spilling into the hallway. Victor pushed the door open, his weapon trained on the figure inside. Nash was hunched over a terminal, his back to the door. "Nash," Victor said coldly. Nash turned slowly, his face a mixture of surprise and guilt. "Victor, what's going on?" "Don't play dumb," Victor snapped. "Tyler traced the mole signal to this room. Start talking." Nash raised his hands defensively. "You've got it wrong. I'm not the mole." "Then explain this," Victor demanded, gesturing to the terminal. Nash hesitated, his eyes darting to the screen. "I was trying to trace the signal myself. Someone's framing me, Victor. You have to believe me." Victor's finger hovered over the trigger, his instincts warring with his trust. Nash had been with them through countless missions, but the evidence was damning. Before Victor could respond, the lights flickered, and a voice crackled over the station's intercom. "Well, well," the voice said, smooth and taunting. "Looks like your team isn't as united as you thought, Commander." Victor's blood ran cold. "Who is this?" The voice chuckled. "Let's just say I'm the one holding all the cards. And you're running out of time." In the control room, Tyler frantically worked to trace the new voice on the intercom. "I've got a partial lock," he said. "It's coming from sublevel 3. Elizabeth glanced at Helen, who had just finished setting up the jammer. "Do you think they're stalling us?" Helen nodded. "Absolutely. They want us distracted while they complete their breach. Elizabeth turned back to the console. Then let's make sure they don't succeed. Victor's calm crackled to life. Commander, the mole isn't Nash, Tyler said urgently. The real signal just moved. It's heading toward the power core. Victor lowered his weapon, guilt flashing across his face. Nash, No time, Nash interrupted. Go. Stop them. I'll hold this area. Victor hesitated, then nodded. Be careful. The power core was the beating heart of Ironclad Station, its humming machinery the only sound as Victor approached. The air was heavy with tension, every shadow a potential threat. Victor scanned the room, his eyes narrowing as he spotted a figure near the main console. It's over, Victor said, raising his rifle. Step away from the console. The figure turned, revealing a familiar face. It was Dr. Bennett, the station's lead scientist. Victor's stomach churned. You? Dr. Bennett smirked, his hands raised in mock surrender. Surprised, Commander? You shouldn't be. I've been 2 steps ahead of you this entire time. Victor's mind raced. Why? What's your endgame? Aegis, Dr. Bennett said simply. It's too valuable to stay here, buried in this frozen wasteland. The people I work for, they'll put it to good use. Victor's grip on his rifle tightened. And what about the lives you've endangered? The people you've betrayed? Dr. Bennett shrugged. Collateral damage. Progress always comes at a cost. Before Victor could respond, the room shook violently as another explosion rocked the station. Dr. Bennett used the distraction to dive behind the console, his hand slamming down on a hidden control panel. The power core began to glow ominously, its hum escalating into a deafening roar. What did you do? Victor demanded. Dr. Bennett laughed. You think you've won? Aegis will be mine, one way or another. Victor lunged for the console, his hands flying over the controls as he tried to stabilize the core. Over the comms, Tyler's voice was panicked. Commander, the core's overloading. If it goes critical. I know, Victor said through gritted teeth. Outside the power core, Marcus and Elizabeth arrived, just in time to see Victor wrestling with the controls. What's happening? Elizabeth shouted. Bennett sabotaged the core, Victor replied. If we don't stop it, the whole station's going up. Elizabeth's eyes widened. What do you need us to do? Victor didn't hesitate. Find Bennett. Stop him from escaping. I'll handle this. Marcus nodded, motioning for Elizabeth to follow. Come on, let's finish this. As Victor worked frantically to stabilize the core, sweat dripped down his face despite the freezing temperatures. The hum grew louder, the glow brighter. For the first time in years, Victor felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. The fate of the station, Aegis, and everyone he cared about rested on his shoulders. Victor's fingers flew across the power core console, the hum of the machinery growing into a deafening roar that shook the walls of Ironclad Station. Warning lights bathed the room in an ominous red glow, and the core's energy output spiked dangerously high on every monitor. Tyler, Victor barked into his comm, his voice taut with urgency. I need a solution now. Tyler's voice crackled back through the static. You're not going to like this, Commander. To stop the core from overloading, we'll need to vent the excess energy directly into the auxiliary grid. But if we do that, Victor's jaw clenched. It'll fry half the station. Better than it taking out the whole place, Tyler countered. Victor exhaled sharply, weighing the impossible decision. But there was no time to debate. Do it. Begin the rerouting process. I'll stabilize what I can from here. Meanwhile, Elizabeth and Marcus sprinted through the labyrinth of corridors, the echoes of distant gunfire and alarms urging them forward. Marcus's comm crackled as Tyler patched in. Bennett's heading for the southern hangar, Tyler informed them. He's got the data on Aegis, and I've just lost control of the internal sensors. He's jamming us from his portable uplink. Typical, Marcus muttered. How long until he's off the station? Minutes, if he gets to the hangar. There's a private shuttle dock there. If he escapes with that data, the entire operation is compromised. Elizabeth's eyes narrowed as she adjusted her grip on the wrench she still carried. Then we don't let him get to that shuttle. In the power core chamber, Victor gritted his teeth as a shower of sparks erupted from the console. The core's energy levels were still rising, and the auxiliary grid was struggling to handle the rerouted power. Rerouting is active, but the grid's buckling, Tyler reported. We're running out of time. Victor glanced at the emergency release valves on the far side of the chamber. He knew what he had to do. I'm engaging the manual overrides, he said. It's the only way to give the grid a chance to stabilize. Victor, that area is not shielded. Tyler protested. The energy surge will. I know, Victor interrupted. Just keep me updated. Elizabeth and Marcus burst into the southern hangar, their boots skidding on the polished floor. Ahead of them, Dr. Bennett was frantically keying in a launch sequence on the shuttle's control panel. Bennett! Marcus shouted, leveling his rifle. Bennett turned, his face twisting into a sneer. You don't understand, do you? Aegis doesn't belong to this frozen graveyard. It's meant for something greater. Elizabeth stepped forward, her voice firm. You betrayed your team, Bennett. You endangered lives. For what? A payday? Bennett's laugh was sharp and bitter. You think this is about money? This is about progress. Aegis can reshape the world. But people like you, you'd bury it here forever. Marcus fired a warning shot that ricocheted off the shuttle, sending sparks flying. Enough talking. Step away from the controls, or the next one isn't a warning. Bennett hesitated, his hand hovering over a concealed device on his belt. Marcus, Elizabeth whispered, her eyes narrowing. He's stalling. But before Marcus could react, Bennett pressed the device, and the shuttle's engines roared to life. A blast of heat and force knocked both of them off their feet. In the power core chamber, Victor had reached the emergency release valves. The heat was oppressive, and arcs of energy crackled dangerously close to him. He gripped the first valve and turned it with all his strength, his muscles straining against the resistance. First valve open, he panted into his calm. What's the status? The grid's stabilizing, but it's not enough, Tyler replied. You'll need to open all three. Victor cursed under his breath, moving to the next valve as the core's vibrations grew more violent. Elizabeth pushed herself to her feet, her ears ringing from the shuttle's engine blast. She saw Bennett climbing into the cockpit, his movements frantic as he prepared for takeoff. Marcus, she shouted, grabbing her fallen teammate by the arm. Marcus groaned, shaking off the disorientation. I'm fine. Go. Elizabeth sprinted toward the shuttle, her grip tightening on the wrench. She climbed onto the boarding ramp just as it began to retract, her heart pounding in her chest. Inside the cockpit, Bennett spotted her in the reflection of the control panel. His eyes widened in panic. You don't know what you're doing. Neither do you, Elizabeth shot back, swinging the wrench with all her strength. The impact shattered the cockpit controls, sending a cascade of sparks flying. The shuttle's engines sputtered, their roar diminishing into a strained whine. Bennett lunged at her, his hands closing around her arm. You'll ruin everything. Elizabeth fought back, driving her knee into his stomach. The force sent him stumbling into the damaged console, where an exposed wire sparked against his coat. Bennett cried out in pain, collapsing to the floor. Victor reached the final valve, his vision blurring from the heat. His hands were blistered, but he forced himself to keep going. Last valve, almost there, he said through gritted teeth. Hurry, Victor, Tyler urged. The core's at critical. With one final effort, Victor turned the valve. A deafening hiss filled the chamber as the energy vented into the auxiliary grid. The monitors flickered, then stabilized as the core's output returned to safe levels. Victor collapsed against the console, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Core stabilized, Tyler reported, relief evident in his voice. You did it, Commander. Back in the hangar, Elizabeth stood over Bennett's unconscious form, her chest heaving. Marcus approached, his rifle trained on the downed scientist. You okay? Marcus asked. Elizabeth nodded, wiping sweat from her brow. Yeah. Shuttle's out of commission. He's not going anywhere. Good, Marcus said, pulling a pair of zip ties from his belt. Let's make sure he stays that way. With the immediate threat neutralized, the team regrouped in the command center. Victor, his hands bandaged and his face pale, stood at the console as Tyler provided a status update. The core's stable, and Bennett's been secured, Tyler said. But this isn't over. Whoever hired him will send someone else. Victor nodded grimly. Then we'll be ready. Helen stepped forward, her voice trembling. What about Aegis? It's only a matter of time before someone else comes for it. Victor's gaze hardened. We're not just protecting a project. We're protecting a legacy. If they want Aegis, they'll have to go through us, and this time, they won't even get close. As the team prepared for the next challenge, the echoes of their victory reverberated through Ironclad Station. They had faced betrayal, danger, and impossible odds, but they had emerged stronger. And they knew the fight for justice was far from over. The morning light filtered through the reinforced windows of Ironclad Station, casting long shadows across the command center. The air carried a quiet tension, the kind that settled after a battle, but before the full weight of its consequences sank in. Victor stood at the central console, his bandaged hands resting on its edges, his face hardened with resolve. Around him, the team gathered in silence, each member carrying their own burden from the events of the last 24 hours. The station was secure, but the threat wasn't over. Aegis, the project that had brought them together and nearly torn them apart, was still a beacon for those willing to exploit its potential. Victor knew this victory, while significant, was just the beginning. We've bought ourselves some time, Victor began, his voice cutting through the stillness. But make no mistake, they'll come again. And next time, they'll bring more firepower, more resources, and more desperation. Elizabeth, leaning against the wall with a cold compress pressed to her bruised temple, spoke up. Bennett's in custody. We've dismantled his uplink and isolated his data caches. Whoever he was working for won't get much from him now. Victor's eyes shifted to Marcus, who stood by the window, scanning the snowy horizon with a sniper's gaze. Any sign of movement? Nothing yet, Marcus replied. But if I were them, I'd be regrouping. They lost a lot last night, but people like that don't just walk away. Victor nodded, his expression grim. Exactly. Which is why we need to make the next move. We can't keep reacting. We need to control the narrative. Tyler, perched in front of a monitor, swiveled his chair around to face the group. I've been combing through Bennett's files. He wasn't just working alone. The data suggests a much larger network, one that's been monitoring Aegis for months. Whoever they are, they've got connections, private military contractors, corporate funding, and political ties. That's not surprising, Elizabeth said. Something as powerful as Aegis was never going to stay hidden forever. We've been playing defense, but we need to ask ourselves, what's the endgame here? Helen, the quiet scientist whose intellect had been pivotal to the team's efforts, stepped forward. Aegis wasn't meant to be a weapon. It was designed to stabilize global energy supplies, to provide a clean and limitless source of power. But in the wrong hands, it could do the exact opposite. That's why it's here, in the middle of nowhere. To protect it from the wrong hands. Victor turned to her, his voice steady. And yet, the wrong hands found it anyway. We can't just keep it hidden anymore. We need a plan that ensures its safety and its legacy. The room fell silent, the weight of the decision settling over them like a heavy fog. Then Tyler's fingers flew over his keyboard, bringing up a holographic map of the region. There's a failsafe built into Aegis, he said. A secure protocol that would make the project impossible to replicate or weaponize. But activating it would render Aegis inoperable, at least temporarily. It would buy us time to figure out a long-term solution. Temporarily? Marcus asked, his tone skeptical. Helen nodded. Yes, but the protocol would scatter its key components across multiple encrypted servers. Reassembling it would require precise access codes that only we have. Elizabeth folded her arms. And let me guess, activating this failsafe isn't exactly a walk in the park? Tyler grinned humorlessly. It's not. The core has to be manually recalibrated in real time. One mistake, and we're looking at a meltdown instead of a shutdown. The room went quiet again, the enormity of the task sinking in. I'll do it, Victor said firmly. No, Elizabeth shot back immediately. You've already pushed yourself to the brink, Victor. Let me. I'm the only one who's spent enough time in the core chamber, Victor interrupted. If this failsafe is going to work, It needs to work on the first try. We don't get a do-over. The team moved swiftly, preparing for what they knew could be their final stand. Marcus fortified the station's defenses, setting up tripwire sensors and remote turrets along the perimeter. Elizabeth and Helen worked side by side to secure Aegis's critical systems, their movements synchronized by months of shared purpose. In the command center, Tyler monitored external communications, intercepting encrypted signals that suggested the enemy was already on the move. "They're coming," he announced. "A strike force. Heavy artillery, aerial support, the whole 9 yards. They're not holding back this time." Victor entered the room, his face streaked with grease and sweat from hours of preparation in the core chamber. "Then neither are we." He placed a hand on Tyler's shoulder. "Once I'm in the core chamber, I need you to handle the timing. Keep everything synchronized. If something goes wrong—" "Nothing's going wrong," Tyler interrupted, his voice resolute. Victor allowed himself a faint smile. "That's the spirit." As the first wave of enemy forces descended on Ironclad Station, the team sprang into action. The station's automated defenses sprang to life, sending a barrage of suppressive fire into the advancing ranks. Marcus manned a sniper perch, picking off targets with deadly precision. Elizabeth and Helen held the central control room, rerouting power to keep the station operational despite the onslaught. Victor descended into the core chamber, the heat and pressure immediately enveloping him like a suffocating embrace. He reached the failsafe console, his hands steady despite the chaos erupting above. "Tyler," he called through the comm, "talk to me." "Enemy breach on the east wing," Tyler reported. "But Marcus and Elizabeth are holding the line. You're clear to proceed." Victor began the recalibration process, his fingers dancing over the controls. The core pulsed with energy, its glow intensifying with every adjustment. Above ground, the battle raged on. The enemy forces were relentless, but the team's coordination was flawless. Elizabeth directed Marcus to cover vulnerable angles, while Helen used the station's systems to create barriers and traps that slowed the attackers' advance. "Victor, we're running out of time," Elizabeth shouted into her comm. "I know." Victor's voice crackled back. "Just hold them off a little longer." In the core chamber, the temperature spiked and warning alarms blared. Sweat poured down Victor's face as he entered the final sequence of the failsafe. "Tyler," he said, his voice strained. "The core's reaching critical. Are the servers ready for the transfer?" "All set," Tyler confirmed. "Just finish the sequence." Victor entered the final command, and the core's glow dimmed, its energy dispersing into the encrypted servers as planned. He let out a ragged breath, his hands trembling. "Failsafe activated," he announced. "Aegis is secure." As the failsafe took effect, the enemy forces began to retreat, their mission compromised. The team regrouped in the command center, battered but victorious. "It's over," Marcus said, lowering his rifle. "For now," Victor replied, his tone cautious. "But they'll be back." Helen stepped forward, her voice steady. "Let them come. We've shown them that this isn't just a project or a station, it's a legacy. And we'll protect it, no matter what." The team exchanged determined looks, their bond forged in the crucible of impossible odds. Victor turned to the window, watching the dawn break over the horizon. "They came here looking for power," he said quietly. "But what they found was something they couldn't take, something they'll never understand. A community united. A legacy worth fighting for." As the light filled the valley, Ironclad Station stood as a testament to resilience, justice, and the unyielding strength of those who refused to back down. The battle was over, but the fight for Aegis, and the ideals it represented, had only just begun. In the snow-covered wilderness of Montana, where jagged peaks pierce the sky and silence reigns, a hidden secret lies buried beneath the surface. Ironclad Station, a facility disguised as a relic of Cold War research, holds the key to humanity's future. Aegis, a revolutionary energy project capable of reshaping the world. But in the wrong hands, it could bring devastation on a scale unimaginable. Victor Kane, a battle-scarred leader haunted by his past, never expected to return to a life of conflict. For years, he sought refuge in the mountains, far from the battles that defined him. Yet when a ruthless shadow network of corporations, mercenaries, and cartels converge on Ironclad, drawn by whispers of the project's potential, Victor finds himself at the center of a fight he cannot ignore. Joined by a team of misfits, each with a past as complicated as his own, Victor is thrust into a battle not just to protect Aegis, but to ensure it isn't weaponized for greed and power. What begins as a covert operation to defend a classified facility quickly spirals into something far greater, a war of ideologies, of redemption, and of trust. As the enemy's tactics grow more cunning and their forces more relentless, Victor and his team must confront not only external threats but their own demons. Betrayals emerge, alliances are tested, and the line between friend and foe blurs. But when the ultimate battle for Aegis unfolds, it isn't brute force that will decide the outcome. It's the strength of the community they've built, the secrets they've buried, and the unshakable resolve of those who refuse to surrender. What lengths will they go to in order to protect what matters most? And how far will their enemies go to claim it for themselves? The fight for Ironclad Station begins now.